No splintered wood floating on the surface, no distress flags raised, no crew calling for help. Just 238 tons of American oak sinking beneath the Pacific in under 10 minutes. The Essex, a whaling vessel out of Nantucket, carried 21 men into the offshore grounds, 2,000 miles west of South America. Official maritime records filed the incident as deliberate attack. Witnesses described calculation, intent, malice in the animal's approach. But how does a whale know where to strike? And what explains the second ram, minutes after the first, aimed at the exact point where the hull had already fractured? The morning of November 20th, 1820, began with calm seas and clear skies. Captain George Pollard Jr. stood on the quarterdeck of the Essex, scanning the horizon for the telltale spout that would signal a pod of sperm whales. Behind him, the trywork sat cold and empty, waiting for the blubber that would be rendered into oil worth more than gold in the lamplit cities of America and Europe. The crew of 21 men had sailed from Nantucket 16 months earlier, their holds still half empty despite steady hunting in the Pacific grounds. First Mate Owen Chase descended from the forecastle, logbook under one arm. At 23, Chase had already earned a reputation among Nantucket's whalers for his precision with the harpoon. He approached the captain with the morning's position readings. They were deep in the offshore grounds, where crews ventured for the largest specimens, the bull whales that could yield 30 barrels of oil from a single animal. The lookout's cry came just after 8 in the morning. A pod of sperm whales, perhaps 40 or 50 animals, moving slowly through the water a mile to the southwest. Captain Pollard gave the order immediately. 3 whaleboats lowered into the water, each crewed by 6 men with harpoons, lances, and coiled lines that could pay out for miles if a whale dove deep. Chase took command of the lead boat. Second mate Matthew Joy commanded the second. Boat steerer Thomas Chappell led the third. The boats rowed silently toward the pod, approaching from downwind. When they reached striking distance, Chase stood in the bow, harpoon raised. The first whale surfaced 20 feet from the boat. Chase drove the iron deep into its flank. The animal dove immediately, the line screaming off the loggerhead as the whale descended into the dark water below. What happened next violated everything the crew knew about whale behavior. One of the bulls separated from the pod. Chase estimated its length at 85 feet, nearly twice the size of an average sperm whale. The animal surfaced 400 yards from the Essex, its massive head breaking the water with unusual force. Then it stopped. For several seconds, the whale remained motionless, its body oriented directly toward the ship. Chase glanced back at the Essex. The bull was not fleeing. It was watching. The whale dove. Chase shouted a warning, but his voice could not carry the distance. On the Essex, cabin boy Thomas Nickerson had climbed the mainmast to observe the hunt. He saw the whale disappear beneath the surface. He saw the water churn as the animal built speed underwater. Nickerson screamed down to the deck, but the skeleton crew remaining aboard had no time to react. The impact came from below the waterline, striking the bow at the ship's most vulnerable point, where the planking curved to meet the keel. The sound carried across the water to the whaleboats, a deep, splintering crack that Chase would later describe as similar to thunder rolling across hills. The Essex shuddered, her masts whipping violently. Several men on deck fell. One man, sailor Benjamin Lawrence, was thrown against the tryworks hard enough to crack 2 ribs. The whale surfaced again, this time on the opposite side of the ship. Chase could see it clearly now from his position in the whaleboat. The animal's head bore scars from previous encounters. Its jaw was asymmetrical, suggesting old injuries that had healed imperfectly. But what struck Chase most was the deliberate nature of its movements. The whale did not thrash or panic. It repositioned itself with precision, aligning its body parallel to the Essex at a distance of roughly 300 feet. Captain Pollard ordered the crew to assess the damage. The carpenter descended into the hold and returned within seconds, his face drained of color. Water was pouring through broken planking near the bow. The ship was taking on water faster than the pumps could manage. Pollard ordered the signal flag raised to recall the whaleboats, but before the flag could be secured, the whale attacked again. This time, the animal approached from the surface. It built speed over 200 yards, its body half submerged, creating a wake that Chase could see from his position nearly a mile away. The whale struck the Essex at the same point it had hit before, ramming the fractured bow with enough force to drive the ship backward through the water. The foremast cracked at its base and toppled, taking down rigging and sails. The bow planking disintegrated. Water rushed into the forward hold in a torrent. The whale passed under the ship and disappeared into the deep Pacific. It did not surface again. Chase later wrote in his personal account that the animal had shown what he could only describe as intent, as if the whale understood the structural weakness it had created with the first impact and returned to exploit it. The idea seemed impossible. Whales were animals, driven by instinct and survival. They did not calculate. They did not plan revenge. But the Essex was sinking, and 21 men were about to learn that the Pacific Ocean cared nothing for what seemed possible. Captain Pollard gave the order to abandon ship 15 minutes after the second impact. The 3 whaleboats came alongside the tilting deck. The crew salvaged what they could: 600 pounds of hardtack biscuits, 65 gallons of fresh water divided among the 3 boats, navigation instruments, a few personal items, the ship's logbook. No one thought to take more food. No one imagined they would need it. The Essex disappeared beneath the surface at 10 minutes past 9 in the morning, less than an hour after the whale's first attack. The crew watched from their boats as the mainmast, still standing, slowly tilted and vanished into the water. They were 2,000 miles from the nearest landmass, adrift in 3 open boats designed for hunting, not for long-distance survival. They had food for perhaps 30 days if rationed carefully. The nearest shipping lanes were weeks away, and somewhere below them, in water deep enough to swallow mountains, the whale that had destroyed their ship continued its journey through the dark. Captain Pollard convened a meeting in his whaleboat within an hour of the sinking. The 3 boats floated alongside each other, tied together with spare rope to prevent separation. 21 men occupied approximately 60 feet of combined vessel length. Chase presented the navigation options based on his calculations. The nearest land was the Marquesas Islands, roughly 1,200 miles to the southwest. The prevailing winds and currents favored that direction. The journey would take perhaps 3 weeks with careful sail management. But the Marquesas carried a reputation. Reports from previous expeditions described hostile encounters with the island populations. Several whaling crews had vanished after making landfall there. The men had heard stories, passed through Nantucket taverns and ship's quarters, of crews who never returned from those volcanic shores. Chase argued for the longer route to South America, over 3,000 miles to the east, directly against the prevailing currents. The journey would take months. Their supplies would not last. The crew voted. 17 men chose South America. 4 voted for the Marquesas. Pollard, though he disagreed with the majority, accepted the decision. On November 22, 1820, 2 days after the sinking, the 3 boats turned their bows east and began rowing into winds that pushed them backward with every stroke. The first week passed in a rhythm of rowing and rationing. Each man received 6 ounces of hardtack and half a pint of water per day. The boats traveled roughly 30 miles in each 24-hour period, fighting the current for every yard gained. The sun burned exposed skin during the day. At night, temperatures dropped low enough that men shivered, despite being only a few degrees south of the equator. Salt water soaked everything. The biscuits turned soft and began to mold. On November 28th, cabin boy Thomas Nickerson recorded in a makeshift journal that several men had begun drinking seawater. Chase ordered it stopped immediately. He had seen sailors die from drinking seawater on previous voyages, their minds deteriorating before their bodies failed. But the water rations were already insufficient. Men's lips cracked and bled. Tongues swelled. By the end of the first week, every man showed signs of dehydration despite the daily ration. The first land appeared on December 20th, Henderson Island, a raised coral atoll barely 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. The boats landed on a narrow beach of crushed coral and volcanic rock. The crew found fresh water in small pools among the rocks. They discovered nesting birds, thousands of them, so unaccustomed to human presence that the men could kill them with sticks. For 3 days, they ate fresh meat and drank clean water. But Henderson Island offered no permanent salvation. The island supported no vegetation beyond low scrub. The bird population, while abundant, would be exhausted within weeks if the entire crew remained. Pollard called another meeting on the beach. 3 men volunteered to stay behind. Thomas Chappell, Seth Weeks, and William Wright chose to risk survival on the island rather than continue in the boats. The decision was recorded in Chase's log with a single sentence. No one argued against it. On December 27th, the 3 boats departed Henderson Island with the remaining 18 men. They left Chappell, Weeks and Wright standing on the beach, each man holding a share of supplies that would last perhaps 2 months if carefully managed. The boats disappeared over the horizon. The 3 men on Henderson Island would not see another human being for 109 days. The ocean changed after Henderson Island. The weather deteriorated. Squalls appeared without warning, dumping rain that the crew tried desperately to catch in spare canvas, but mostly lost to the wind. The boats separated during a storm on January 10th, 1821. Captain Pollard's boat lost sight of Chase's boat and Joy's boat in the darkness. When dawn came, the ocean was empty in every direction. Chase's boat continued east. By mid-January, the daily ration had been reduced to 3 ounces of bread and a 1/4 pint of water. Men began to hallucinate. Boat steerer Benjamin Lawrence reported seeing ships on the horizon that disappeared when the boat drew closer. Sailor Isaac Cole claimed to hear voices calling from beneath the waves. Chase wrote in his log that maintaining discipline required constant vigilance. Men argued over imagined slights. Small disagreements nearly escalated to violence. The first death came on January 18th. Richard Peterson, a black sailor from New York, died during the night. His body showed no obvious injuries. Chase suspected dehydration and starvation had simply stopped his heart. The crew wrapped Peterson's body in spare canvas and committed it to the sea with a brief prayer. No one suggested an alternative. Not yet. But 4 days later, when sailor Isaac Cole died in similar circumstances, the prayer was shorter. And when the canvas came off before the body went overboard, several men looked at the corpse differently than they had looked at Peterson's remains. Chase saw the looks. He understood what they meant. He said nothing. In Captain Pollard's boat, separated from Chase by 60 miles of open ocean, cabin boy Charles Shorter died on January 28th. Shorter had been 17 years old when the Essex sailed from Nantucket. His body, already wasted from 7 weeks of starvation, weighed perhaps 90 pounds. The crew in Pollard's boat faced the same calculations that Chase's crew had begun to consider. They were dying. The rations were nearly exhausted. Land remained weeks away at best. Second mate Matthew Joy, commanding the 3rd boat, died on February 8th. His crew, now led by boat steerer Obed Hendricks, faced the mathematics of survival, with Joy's body still warm in the bottom of the boat. 7 men remained in that boat. The bread was gone. The water was nearly gone. The nearest shipping lane was still hundreds of miles distant. Hendricks gave the order that Chase had not yet given, and Pollard had not yet given. The crew butchered Joy's body that same day. They used the tools they had, the knives designed for cutting whale blubber. They worked methodically, separating muscle from bone. They ate the first pieces raw because they had no way to cook them. The taste was described later in testimony that some survivors would give and others would deny, as similar to beef but softer. Chase's boat found Pollard's boat on February 11th by pure chance. The two boats spotted each other's sails at dawn. When they came alongside, both crews were eating. Neither crew explained what they were eating. Both crews understood. The calculation had been made in both boats independently, within days of each other. Mathematics did not care about morality. Obed Hendrick's boat was never seen again. Whether it sank, whether the crew died, whether they drifted past the shipping lanes and continued west into the empty Pacific, no record exists. 7 men disappeared into the ocean as completely as the Essex had disappeared. In Pollard's boat, the food ran out again within a week. The crew faced a new calculation. They had no more dead to consume, but they still had days or weeks of ocean ahead of them. Someone would die soon from starvation. But what if someone died now, by decision rather than chance? What if they made the choice instead of waiting for the ocean to make it for them? Pollard refused. Chase, in the other boat, refused. But in Pollard's boat, 4 men began to discuss an alternative that Chase would later describe in his published account only as the most terrible decision ever forced upon human beings. They drew lots on February 1st, 1821, 73 days after the Essex sank. The paper slips were prepared by Pollard himself, though he prayed before making them. Each man drew from a canvas bag. The lot fell to cabin boy Owen Coffin, Captain Pollard's 17-year-old cousin. Pollard offered to take Coffin's place. The captain argued that he bore responsibility for every man aboard, that his duty required him to die in place of his cousin. But Coffin refused. According to the account later given by survivor Charles Ramsdell, Coffin stated that the lot had been drawn fairly and that changing the result would make a mockery of the process they had all agreed to follow. If they abandoned the lottery now, what principle would remain? Coffin accepted his fate with what Ramsdell described as surprising composure for a 17-year-old facing certain death. A second lottery determined who would carry out the execution. The lot fell to Coffin's friend, Charles Ramsdell, also 17 years old. The two boys had grown up together in Nantucket, had signed onto the Essex on the same day, had shared a bunk in the forecastle for 16 months before the sinking. Now, one would kill the other in a small boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The historical record contains no detailed description of what happened next. Chase's published narrative mentions only that Coffin died on February 1st and that his body sustained the remaining crew in Pollard's boat for 10 days. No witness described the method. No survivor explained the mechanics. The silence in the documents suggests that some experiences cannot be reduced to words that other human beings would want to read. What is known is that Pollard's boat, now containing 3 living men and portions of Coffin's remains, continued east. The captain stopped eating after the second day. Ramsdell and sailor Owen Hendricks, the only other survivors in that boat, forced Pollard to consume small amounts to keep him alive, but the captain's will had fractured. He spent hours staring at the horizon without speaking. When he did speak, he called for his cousin. In Chase's boat, separated by dozens of miles of empty ocean, the crew faced their own calculations. 3 men remained alive: Benjamin Lawrence, Thomas Nickerson, and Chase himself. They had finished consuming the bodies of the men who had died naturally weeks earlier. The daily water ration was down to 2 ounces, barely enough to keep a man's tongue from swelling shut. Lawrence had stopped moving entirely, lying in the bottom of the boat with his eyes open but unfocused. Nickerson, the youngest survivor, had begun pulling out his own hair in small clumps. Chase maintained the discipline of navigation. Each day, he took sun sights with the sextant and updated their position in the logbook. The ritual gave him something to focus on beyond the hunger and thirst. The calculations suggested they were approaching the shipping lanes off the coast of Chile. But Chase had made those same calculations 2 weeks earlier, and no ships had appeared. The Pacific was vast beyond human comprehension. A boat 20 feet long could drift for months without intersecting another vessel's path. The rescue came on February 18th, 1821, 90 days after the Essex sank. The merchant brig Indian, sailing from Peru to Chile, spotted Chase's boat at dawn. Captain William Crozier of the Indian later testified that he initially mistook the whaleboat for driftwood. Only when his lookout noticed the mast still standing did Crozier alter course to investigate. As the Indian drew closer, the crew saw 3 figures in the boat. None of them moved. None of them responded to hails. Crozier ordered a boat lowered. The boarding party from the Indian found Chase sitting in the stern of the whaleboat with the sextant in his lap and the logbook open beside him. He was conscious, but did not speak. Benjamin Lawrence lay in the bilge, covered in salt residue, his breathing shallow. Thomas Nickerson sat in the bow, still holding a piece of canvas that had served as a makeshift sail. All 3 men weighed less than 100 pounds. Their skin had darkened from sun exposure to the point where Crozier initially could not determine their race. Their lips had split open in multiple places. Their eyes were sunk deep in their skulls. In the bottom of the boat, clearly visible to the Indian's crew, were human bones. Arm bones, leg bones, a partial rib cage. The bones had been split open lengthwise, the marrow extracted. Some still had marks from where they had been scraped clean. Crozier ordered the bones collected and committed to the sea before bringing the survivors aboard. He gave no explanation for this decision in his official report, but the implication was clear. Some evidence was better left unwitnessed by the full crew. Some truth served no purpose beyond creating nightmares. Chase, Lawrence, and Nickerson were given water in small amounts, then weak broth, then gradually solid food over the following days. None of them could keep down the first meals. Their stomachs had shrunk too much. Chase recovered his ability to speak within 2 days. The first words he said, according to Crozier's log, were a question about whether any other Essex boats had been found. Crozier told him no. Chase nodded and said nothing else for the rest of that day. Captain Pollard's boat was rescued 5 days later, on February 23rd, by the American whale ship Dauphin. Captain Zimri Coffin of the Dauphin, no relation to Owen Coffin, spotted the boat drifting without sail or oars. When the Dauphin came alongside, only 2 men remained alive. Pollard sat in the stern. Charles Ramsdell lay curled in the bow. Between them, scattered across the floorboards, were human bones. The Dauphin's crew found something else. Pollard was holding a bone, gnawing on it, when the rescue boat arrived. He did not stop when the sailors called out. He did not respond when they climbed aboard. Only when a sailor physically removed the bone from Pollard's hands did the captain react, fighting to retrieve it with strength that shocked the rescuers given his physical condition. It took 2 men to restrain him, while a third administered water. Ramsdell was unconscious but alive. Pollard, once subdued and given water, began to speak. His words came in fragments that Captain Coffin struggled to record coherently. Pollard asked repeatedly about Owen Coffin. He described the lottery. He explained that his cousin had insisted on accepting the result. Pollard repeated this explanation multiple times, as if trying to convince himself it was true. He never explicitly stated what happened after the lottery, but the bones in the boat told that story clearly enough. The Dauphin carried Pollard and Ramsdell to Valparaiso, Chile, where they were reunited with Chase, Lawrence, and Nickerson. The 5 survivors remained in Valparaiso for 3 weeks while recovering strength. During that time, Chase began writing his account of the disaster. He worked on it obsessively, filling page after page with careful descriptions of navigation, weather, and rationing. The sections dealing with the final weeks were notably shorter. Some events, Chase wrote, were impossible to describe in language that would serve any useful purpose. The British ship Surrey, dispatched from Valparaiso, reached Henderson Island on April 5, 1821. The 3 men who had stayed behind, Thomas Chappell, Seth Weeks, and William Wright, were found alive. They had survived on birds, fish, and the island's limited fresh water. They were emaciated but coherent. They had not resorted to cannibalism. When told what had happened to the men who continued in the boats, all 3 survivors from Henderson Island remained silent. No one recorded their reactions. 8 men out of 21 survived the Essex disaster. The 5 from the boats carried marks that would never fade. Chase developed severe nervous exhaustion, experiencing nightmares that prevented sleep for years afterward. Pollard returned to the sea as captain of another whaling vessel, the Two Brothers, which wrecked on a reef 2 years later. After that second disaster, Pollard never sailed again. He spent the remainder of his life as a night watchman in Nantucket, walking the streets after dark when most people were asleep. Thomas Nickerson, the cabin boy who had been 14 when the Essex sailed, did not speak publicly about the disaster for over 60 years. When he finally wrote his account as an old man, he included details that Chase had omitted. Nickerson described the taste. He described the process. He described how quickly human beings could abandon principles when faced with the absolute certainty of death. His manuscript was not published during his lifetime. His family considered it too disturbing for public consumption. The whale that destroyed the Essex was never found. No subsequent whaling vessel reported encountering a bull sperm whale of 85 feet with the scars Chase had described. Either the animal avoided all future contact with ships, or it died shortly after the attack from injuries sustained in the ramming. The ocean kept that secret as completely as it had kept the bodies of the 13 men who did not survive. The timeline of the Essex disaster follows a clear progression. On November 20th, 1820, a sperm whale attacked and sank an American whaling vessel in the Pacific Ocean through 2 deliberate rams to the bow. 21 men escaped in 3 whaleboats with inadequate supplies. Over the next 90 days, 13 men died from starvation, dehydration, and exposure. At least 4 men were consumed by their surviving crewmates. 8 men lived to reach port and tell the story. The most consistent explanation for the whale's behavior combines territorial defense with learned aggression. Sperm whales are social animals that live in family groups called pods. Chase's log confirms that the Essex crew had already harpooned 1 whale from the pod when the bull attacked. Adult male sperm whales, particularly large bulls, are known to defend their pods against threats. The animal that attacked the Essex was protecting its family members from hunters who had already wounded one of them. The precision of the attack suggests prior experience. The whale struck the bow twice, both times hitting the structural weak point where the curved planking met the keel. This knowledge likely came from previous encounters with whaling vessels. By 1820, the Pacific whaling grounds had been hunted intensively for over 2 decades. Large bulls, especially those bearing scars from harpoons, would have accumulated experience with ships and boats. The whale that destroyed the Essex had probably survived multiple hunting attempts. It had learned where ships were vulnerable. When it witnessed another hunt beginning, it applied that knowledge. The alternative explanations do not fit the evidence as well. Random collision fails to account for the second, targeted attack. Illness or injury does not explain the calculated approach and the precise strike points. The whale's behavior was neither accidental nor irrational. It was a defensive response by an intelligent animal that recognized a threat and eliminated it using methods proven effective through experience. The consequences extended far beyond the 8 survivors. The whaling industry took note. Reports of the Essex disaster circulated through every major whaling port in America and Britain. Ship owners began installing reinforced bows on new vessels. Captains modified hunting protocols to avoid provoking large bulls. Some crews refused to hunt in the offshore grounds where the Essex had been attacked, despite the higher concentrations of whales in those waters. The Pacific whaling fleet operated under new awareness that the animals they hunted could fight back effectively. No legal investigation followed the Essex sinking. Maritime law in 1821 held no framework for determining liability when an animal destroyed a ship. Captain Pollard faced no formal charges related to the deaths of his crew, though Nantucket society made its judgment clear. Pollard was given command of another vessel, but after that ship also wrecked, no owner would trust him again. The community blamed him not for the sinking, but for the decision to sail east instead of southwest to the Marquesas. That choice condemned his men to months of slow death instead of the quick violence they might have faced on those islands. The cannibalism was officially ignored. No court examined what happened in the boats. No inquiry asked detailed questions about which men were eaten and when. Chase's published narrative in 1821 omitted most of those details. Nickerson's fuller account remained unpublished for decades. The surviving crew members spoke to each other about it rarely, and to outsiders never. Nantucket knew, but did not discuss. The silence served everyone's interests. The survivors wanted to rebuild their lives. The families wanted to bury their dead with dignity. The whaling industry wanted to avoid questions about what sailors might be forced to do when voyages went catastrophically wrong. Herman Melville encountered Chase's narrative in the 1840s while working aboard a whaling vessel. The account of a whale deliberately destroying a ship became the foundation for Moby Dick. Melville transformed Chase's careful, factual report into an epic of obsession and revenge. But the novel's central premise, that a whale could attack a ship with intent and calculation, came directly from the Essex disaster. Fiction amplified reality, but did not invent it. The white whale of Melville's imagination had a direct ancestor in the scarred bull that Owen Chase watched position itself for a second attack on a November morning in the Pacific. The Essex case established precedents that shaped whaling practice for the next 50 years. Crews learned to maintain greater distance from pods during hunts. Ships carried more lifeboats and better emergency supplies. Captains developed protocols for what to do if separated from the ship in hostile waters. But no regulation addressed the fundamental problem. Whaling remained an industry built on sending small boats into open ocean to attack large, intelligent, potentially aggressive animals. The mathematics of that equation occasionally produced disasters. The Essex simply made those disasters impossible to ignore. The 3 men who stayed on Henderson Island were retrieved alive, but their decision to remain haunted the 5 who survived the boats. If the entire crew had stayed on the island instead of attempting the impossible voyage to South America, how many would have lived? The bird population might have supported 15 men for months. Rescue ships did visit the island eventually. The men who chose the boats condemned themselves to suffering that the men on the island avoided. But that knowledge came only after the fact. In December 1820, with limited information and cultural memories of violent encounters in the Marquesas, the decision to sail east seemed rational. Hindsight revealed it as the choice that killed 13 men. 8 survivors carried the weight of those deaths for the rest of their lives. Chase wrote obsessively, trying to organize the chaos into coherent narrative. Pollard walked night patrols in Nantucket until he died, as if he could never stop standing watch. Nickerson waited until he was old before attempting to describe what happened in full detail. Ramsdell disappeared from historical records entirely, his name appearing in no documents after 1823. The men who stayed on Henderson Island integrated back into normal life more successfully, suggesting that the ocean journey, not the initial disaster, created the permanent damage. The whaling industry continued for another 80 years after the Essex sank. Tens of thousands more voyages launched from Nantucket, New Bedford, and ports across the Atlantic. Most returned safely. Some did not. The Essex became the cautionary tale used to train new crews, the example cited when captains explained emergency protocols. But it did not stop the hunts. The profit margins were too large, the global demand for whale oil too strong. The Essex proved that whales could destroy ships, but it did not prove that the risk outweighed the reward. The final question belongs not to the whale or the ocean, but to the system that sent 21 men into the Pacific with insufficient lifeboats, inadequate supplies, and no backup plan for disaster. The industry knew the risks. Ship owners had seen crews vanish before. Yet vessels continued to sail undermanned and underprovisioned because emergency equipment cut into cargo space, and cargo space determined profit. If survival after shipwreck mattered as much as profit before it, Why did the Essex carry only 3 small boats for 21 men and provisions for barely a month?